There have been numerous TV newscasts of the Council on American Islamic Relations claims that anti-Muslim incidents of bias are spiraling out of control. But what is clear from these broadcasts is that society is rejecting certain people's pro-Hamas statements and actions. Time and again, CAIR is referring to schools, students, protests, and so forth that are pro-Hamas in nature. The alarm bell that CAIR is sounding is basically public support for Hamas is being stifled.
It's not the Muslims who are locked up in Cooper Union. It's not the Muslims who are afraid to go to Washington Park. It's not the Muslims who are afraid to go to class. The Jews aren't attacking the Muslims. Yes, there was a young boy who was tragically murdered by a Polish Catholic in central Illinois. That maniac will spend the rest of his life in jail. But the fact of the matter is, the emergency now is not the Jews or anyone else attacking the Muslims. It's the Muslims attacking the Jews.
Islamophobia is just sort of waiting for a switch to flip. And we're sort of right back to where we were when, for instance, Donald Trump announced that he was planning on banning Muslims from this country. So we're right there again. We're getting waves of incidents. The anti-Arab bias is shocking. The anti-Muslim bias is shocking. And it didn't take very much. Wonder where have we come as a nation at this point in time.
Corey Saylor, the Research and Advocacy Director with the Council on American Islamic Relations, says they've seen several reports of threats, assaults, and more.
And then we have a lot of community members who are just plain old being intimidated, whether it be at work or at school.
Although CAIR is doing their best to ignore the events of October 7th, many people were shocked and repelled by the mass murder of Hamas. Furthermore, many people were disgusted by the widespread support of Hamas, support that includes the executive director of CAIR National, Nihad Awad, saying October 7 made him happy.
The people of Gaza only decided to break the siege, the walls of the concentration camp on October 7. And yes, I was happy to see people breaking the siege and throwing down the shackles of their own land and walk free into their lands that they were not allowed to walk in. And yes, the people of Gaza have the right to self-defense, have the right to defend themselves. And yes, Israel as an occupying power does not have that right to self-defense. Gaza became the liberation source, the inspiration for people. Gaza transformed many minds around the world, including people who are not Muslim. What kind of thing?
Anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. climbed 388% in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks on Israel last month, according to the Anti-Defamation League. And bias incidents on Muslims jumped 182%, according to the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Our new numbers show that we received 1,283 complaints over just the past month. That's a 216% increase compared to last year. That includes hate crimes, hate speech, free speech violations, employment discrimination, attacks on protesters, and also employment and school bullying. So it's a wide variety of problems that are plaguing the American Muslim community. You know, a large chunk of the complaints we're receiving are from students, not only in public schools, but also in colleges. We've seen schools that issued very biased, one-sided statements that acknowledge the horrific killing of Israeli civilians, but completely ignore the horrific killing of Palestinian civilians. And then you've had incidents in which teachers themselves are delivering lesson plans that are not only biased, but inappropriate, Islamophobic, racist in nature. And then, of course, bullying. Kids bullying other kids because they're visibly Muslim, because they support Palestine.
I wanted to ask you about that. The rise in harassment against Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, Muslims, those are all on the rise since the start of the war, right?
Yeah, that's right, Ellison. According to the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, there has been a 216% increase in complaints about Islamophobia and anti-Arab incidents just compared to last year. And if you look closely at the actual breakdown of those numbers, the biggest offenders are reported free speech violations, employment discrimination, hate crimes, and bullying. Of course, we've seen that play out in videos online. We've covered some of those stories here, and it's really difficult for these communities right now.
Edina High School authorities and school authorities accused them of being anti-Semitic on the basis of using the chant during the walkout of "From the River to the Sea, Palestine will be free."
Minneapolis attorney Bruce Nestor says he's now taking legal action in hopes of getting those Edina students' suspensions rescinded, because he says that 10-word phrase has been widely used and misunderstood.
That is a slogan that is used by elected representatives here in the United States. It is used by hundreds of thousands of demonstrators in support of the aspirations of the Palestinian people for freedom.
But controversy has often followed it. Representative Rashida Tlaib was formally censured by the House earlier this month, in part because she used the phrase. And several Jewish groups, including the Anti-Defamation League, do consider it anti-Semitic, writing, "It is fundamentally a call for a Palestinian state extending from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, territory that includes the state of Israel, which would mean the dismantling of the Jewish
There's
state."
no evidence of an intent to harm or discriminate or be anti-Semitic. There's nothing that's objectively true about this statement being characterized as anti-Semitic. There's a dispute, and the Edina School District chose to adopt one interpretation of some elements of the pro-Israel community, but hardly a universal one.
According to CAIR Minnesota, it's also a stand no other district, to their knowledge, has taken.
Other students have protested similarly and have echoed the same statements, and those students did not get suspended.
In Edina, protesters interrupted a school board meeting over the suspension of 2 students. The Minnesota chapter on the Council of American Islamic Relations says the 2 girls were suspended for a chant they used in a pro-Palestine protest at school. They allegedly used a phrase many view as an anti-Semitic call for the elimination of Israel. But protesters say the students' speech is being suppressed.
We do not want schools to create the environment where Muslim students or students, Jewish students, to feel somehow that messages that are coming from educators and leaders are not necessarily fully reflective of the nature of the conflict.
The board eventually adjourned the meeting. The Edina School District says it cannot comment on specific cases of students.
We are seeing an unprecedented surge of hate bias incidents targeting Palestinian Americans, Muslim Americans, and Arab Americans. In fact, our data shows that there's been a 216% increase in the number of hate bias incidents as of October 7th, impacting our communities. Unfortunately, we've been seeing the consistent dehumanization of Palestinians abroad, but also within our own country, that is fueling hate violence. Obviously, we don't know the motive in this particular case. My organization is not working directly with the families involved in this, but we did offer a reward for information leading to an arrest, and we're calling on elected officials at every level of the government to speak out strongly against the hate bias targeting Muslim, Palestinian, and Arab American communities. It's unacceptable that at every level of the government, there have been overwhelmingly one-sided statements that have disproportionately expressed support for other communities at the expense of Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian communities. And unfortunately, that is fueling, in large part, the sentiment that's emboldening, in many cases, a hate bias that we're seeing within our communities. We see cases of students who are afraid for their safety on college campuses, employees who are concerned about retaliation, harassment, even losing their jobs, simply for expressing solidarity with basic Palestinian human rights, and that's not acceptable. We need every elected official at every level of the government to speak out loudly and forcefully and to call for an end to this senseless violence.
Understood. And we need to hear them speaking out about violence against all groups, all ethnic groups, including the extraordinary rise in anti-Semitism that has been cataloged.
The Council on American Islamic Relations is representing the University of South Florida chapter of Students for Justice in Palestine, saying the state university system's order to disband the groups because of a statement made by a national group is unconstitutional.
We told you earlier about the 3 Palestinian college students shot over the weekend in Vermont. Now, the mother of one of them says he may never walk again. Joining me now from the Council of American Islamic Relations is the Director of Research and Advocacy, Corey Saylor. Corey, whether it was a hate crime, that's still being investigated right now, but we have seen a rise in Islamophobia, also in anti-Semitism, due to the Israel-Hamas war. Do you think this can be stopped, and if so, how?
Well, to put it into context for you, it's a 216% increase in incoming reports of bias and requests for help last month over a similar period last year. So just a staggering amount of people who are suffering from bias. How does it stop? It's fairly straightforward. President Biden can work to get a permanent ceasefire because the major driver of this particular wave of Islamophobia is the fighting that's going on overseas. And then domestically elected officials can make sure that their messaging is intended to cool things down as opposed to increase the heat.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, that ceasefire is a very controversial topic. Some people think that if you do have a ceasefire, Israel will just get run over. But let's focus on the victims here and even some potential targets. There's people right now in the United States living in fear. How is your organization addressing this?
Well, when people contact us, we provide services, whether that be legal services if the situation merits that, or advocacy services, such as writing letters, reaching out, calling media attention to things. Because we want people to know that, particularly in this moment, it is very important to go out and use your voice and engage in the political process in a positive manner that helps to bring about that lasting ceasefire and end to the occupation and apartheid. What we don't want people to do is feel afraid, so that's what CAIR is here for. We're here to support them in their moment of need and to make sure that they get justice when some form of discrimination occurs to them.
And I'm sure they're very grateful for that. Is there any coordination? Is that even a possibility between organizations like yours and Jewish organizations? Could there be a united front against the violence here?
Well, I would say that if you go to any rally opposing the occupation and apartheid, you will see people of many different faiths. Often these rallies are led by people of the Jewish faith and include Arabs and Muslims and Christians, African Americans, people of AAPI descent. You're seeing the whole plethora of folks. So that's already happening. And we're very proud of that fact.
I definitely have seen images that reflect what you're saying there. So I know that's true. Corey Saylor, thanks so much for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome back to In Focus. Muslim communities in Ohio are also feeling the impact of the Israeli-Hamas war. Ohio's Council on American Islamic Relations reports that since the war began, they've received nearly 200 reports of anti-Muslim and anti-Arab discrimination in just 1 month. That's more complaints than they received in all of 2022.
Palestinians in New Jersey say they're experiencing unprecedented levels of bigotry and even retaliation in the workplace for speaking out on behalf of Palestine, and blame the rhetoric of public officials for the backlash.
Anti-Semitism on college campuses continues to climb, but Muslim activists insist they too are being harassed. We talk with the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Southern California.
Of a surge in Islamophobia since the war between Israel and Hamas began, according to the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Council on Islamic American Relations today posts that 1,283 reports, either requests for help or reports of bias from October 7th when Hamas invaded Israel to the 4th of November. Evidenced a 216% increase compared to last year, where there was like an average of 29 complaints 409 requests in a 29-day period. So we're looking at over 1,200.
The Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, said it's documented more than a 200% increase in complaints of Islamophobia across the country.
The so-called progressive Bay Area is not exempt. We have received reports of violent hate crimes in Monterey, in Stanford, in Petaluma, in San Francisco. And the list goes on. Our community is under attack.
The Council on American Islamic Relations says reported incidents against Muslims and Arabs are up more than 200% since the war started.
How'd you like to lose yours? You'd like to have your head beheaded.
All new at 11, this is video captured by a Metro rider. It could lead to hate crime charges. The woman who took this video says a man threatened her life because she's Muslim and was showing support for Palestine.
The Council on American Islamic Relations is condemning D.C. Metro Police's lack of a response after a man threatened a Muslim woman with beheading. The woman was on the Orange Line with some acquaintances on their way to last night's Palestinian human rights protest when the man began yelling profanities and threats at her. Witnesses say the man was also armed, but police not too sure about that.
Again, the same questions. Are you sure there was a gun? What color was it? Are you sure you actually saw a gun? Just really belittling the entire situation and the threats that were made, and going as far to say that my life was not threatened because he did not explicitly say the words, "I am going to kill you."
CAIR sent a letter to the police department calling on them to identify and arrest the man.
What it looks like is that there's a perceived notion of who I am as I'm walking in the street, entering into a bank, going to school, and there are reactions and hateful harassment that's happening in these public spaces.
A Muslim civil rights group is calling for a bias probe in today's shooting outside of a Providence mosque. The 50-year-old victim worked at the mosque on Hoskins Street and was shot in the back. He was shot in the front of the mosque while selling Islamic goods. He was taken to the hospital but is expected to survive. Now, police are investigating but say they are not yet ready to say the victim's religion played any role in this shooting.
Recently, the organization CAIR, C-A-I-R, which stands for the Council on American Islamic Relations, had put out some information that is quite distressing. I just want to cite a couple of the things that they've received more than 1,200 calls for help. This is in the context of the war that's happening right now, and that's a 216% increase over the previous year. Essentially, people are calling into this organization talking about anti-Arab bias in their lives. And what's your reaction to that? Have you been experiencing this?
Unfortunately, it doesn't surprise me. I have personally experienced this. I myself, along with my daughter, I was attending a rally in Rockville, Maryland last week, where a very peaceful rally calling for a ceasefire, where directly adjacent to us was a very vocal, vitriolic counter-protest that were shouting at us. And as you can see, I'm very visibly Muslim. Things like animals, barbarians, we're going to take your heads, go back home, murderous Muslims, we'll kill your brothers, you're not welcome here, and on and on. My own daughter experienced this when she was walking in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago. She also wears hijab, and somebody yelled at her, baby murderer. She has faced significant pushback at her school here in Howard County, Maryland as well, in trying to organize something as simple as a walkout.
There has also been a 216% increase in anti-Arab and anti-Muslim incidents, according to the Council on American Islamic Relations, a group also sounding alarm bells that some pro-Palestinian protests have been banned, many voicing concerns about Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza and the killing of more than 11,000 Palestinians, nearly half of whom are children.
That there are people who are very deliberately using dehumanizing anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian language to not only justify the killing of Palestinians in Gaza, but also to silence supporters of Palestinian human rights here in America.
Important to know that the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, reports more than 1,200 reports of either concerns for help, requests for help, or bias, and that is just, Savannah, in the last month. The Council on American Islamic Relations reports an unprecedented 216% jump in requests for help and reports of bias incidents in the month since the October 7th attacks compared to the same period last year.
And Joe Biden's home in Delaware became the site of a rally yesterday. Delaware groups and allies planned to march peacefully in Wilmington yesterday. The alliance comprises of Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, American Muslims for Palestine, Palestine, the Council on American Islamic Relations, and a host of other Delaware organizations. The rally commenced on the strip of land between two streets, was followed by a march to President Biden's home nearby.
Louder! In the South Bay tonight, the ongoing war loomed over an anniversary gala for the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR. Hundreds were there to celebrate the organization's work and ongoing mission. But at the same time, many attendees are mourning loved ones killed in Gaza. NBC Bay Area's Marianne Favreau has more.
Security was tight here at the Santa Clara Convention Center, including additional Santa Clara police officers. But that didn't stop people from gathering here tonight to both mourn and move forward. Prayers opened the event Saturday night. The theme, the American Muslim story. More than 1,200 people gathered to celebrate CAIR's success in advocating for the rights of American Muslims. But for some, this year's event is punctuated with sadness, as many in this room are mourning the loss of family killed in Gaza. Basim El-Kara says he has personally lost more than 24 family members.
Both my parents were born in the Gaza Strip, and we lost several family members, and we just lost one of our cousins, who's a journalist, was killed yesterday.
CAIR leaders say the ripple effect of the war in the Middle East is an increase in hate crimes targeting Bay Area Muslims.
We have received dozens of complaints of Islamophobic incidents in the last several weeks. We've received complaints about children at school being bullied and harassed. We've received complaints about people in workplaces feeling targeted and alienated by their workplaces environment and their support for Israel at those companies. And then we've received complaints of violent hate crimes.
Just last week, a Stanford student of Syrian descent was the victim of a hit and run on campus. Santa Clara County Sheriff's deputies are now investigating the attack as a hate crime and released this sketch of the suspect. Meantime, CAIR leaders say they're urging people attending the event to put more pressure on elected officials to demand a ceasefire in Gaza.
We've watched more than 10,000 Palestinians be killed by the Israeli government, and our job is to push back and to advocate for peace.
Fighting for peace, not just on the front lines of war, but here in our own backyard. In Santa Clara, Marianne Favreau, NBC Bay Area News.
To the Daily News now, Columbia University barring 2 pro-Palestinian student groups from holding campus activities for the remainder of the fall semester. Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voice for Peace will lose university funding and the eligibility to hold events on campus. The decision was made after the 2 groups repeatedly violated university policies related to holding campus events, culminating in an unauthorized event. The university says the event proceeded despite warnings and included threatening rhetoric and intimidation. The student groups did not comment, but a spokesperson for the Council on American Islamic Relations New York chapter condemned it as an attack on free speech.
Well, since October 7th, the U.S. has seen a spike in both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and also around the world.
There's a common habit of blaming people of color for things they had nothing to do with, simply because someone who looks like them or shares their beliefs did something wrong.
Right.
But also you have to keep in mind that there are people who are very deliberately using dehumanizing anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian language to not only justify the killing of Palestinians in Gaza, but also to silence supporters of Palestinian human rights here in America. So a lot of this is happening because of a deliberate campaign of bigotry.
The Council on American Islamic Relations reports an unprecedented 216% jump in requests for help and reports of bias incidents in the month since the October 7th attacks compared to the same period last year.
We're tracking an over 200% increase in complaints that we have received in the last 30 days as compared to years past.
The Bay Area chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations says Islamophobic incidents over the past month rival the numbers last seen in the aftermath of 9/11. They tell ABC7 News they think it's only the surface.
Not everybody reports every incident. Some people report to different organizations. Other people don't report out of fear of further intimidation and targeting.
And given that the Israel-Hamas war shows no signs of stopping anytime soon, CAIR says they worry things could get even worse.
The first ever national strategy to counter Islamophobia was announced earlier this month by the Biden administration, just as the country is beginning to witness more anti-Islamic incidents.
As a result of the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, we have seen an uptick in anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Semitic, and Islamophobic incidents across America.
The White House is taking action with a new strategy to counter Islamophobia after the country began seeing an increase in anti-Islamic incidents just weeks after the Israel and Hamas war broke out.
It's actually been beyond crisis and into appalling at this point. We're getting ready to release new data shortly, and that will show an increase of over 1,000 incidents of people requesting help or reporting bias to us in the last 4 weeks.
Corey Saylor is the Research and Advocacy Director at the Council on American Islamic Relations. He says they've been seeing a flood of requests for help since the war began, and it's 5 times the amount that was reported in the same time last year.
These have been everything from, for instance, the murder of a 6-year-old boy in Chicago. We have multiple incidents in which vehicles have been used to attempt to ram protesters or actually hit them. We have multiple incidents in which people have been threatened with murder.
In Congress, Montana Representative Ryan Zinke introduced a bill that would expel Palestinians from the U.S. In a release, the congressman's office says the bill would, quote, prevent Palestinian terrorists from abusing the United States legal immigration system and is necessary to keep Americans safe. In response, Muslim representatives Andre Carson, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib said in a statement that using the full power of the state to target and persecute a particular ethnic group or nationality is fascism and pure bigotry, and said the legislation violates the Constitution. Corey says the bill is an example of a class of people being targeted for no reason other than their place of birth.
It's really time for us as a country to get beyond that and live up to our own values. You know, the notion of expelling people because they were born in a certain place, I think should disqualify you from public office, to be honest.
Contrasting to Representative Zinke's legislation, Senator Dick Durbin was joined by more than 100 lawmakers in urging President Biden to take action to ensure Palestinians aren't forced to leave the U.S. In Washington, I'm Stetson Miller.
Well, a group of people plan to gather for a protest outside Meta headquarters in Menlo Park later this afternoon. Some of the organizers include the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is the nation's largest Muslim civil rights group. They're calling that demonstration the, quote, Let Palestine Speak End Meta Censorship demonstration. They accuse the social media giant of flagging and removing posts from Palestinians about the Israel-Hamas war. Meta recently announced that its oversight board will hear about 2 posts in particular that pro-Palestinian groups say were wrongly censored. At issue whether some of those posts violate Meta's policies against sharing graphic images and depicting what it considers to be dangerous organizations.
I get to Channel 2's Kirsten Garris, who's live in Washington, D.C. And Kirsten, you spoke with advocacy groups about all these threats and what's being done to try to keep these communities safe.
We're talking about increased reports of harassment, vandalism, and assaults nationwide, and in some cases, even murder.
You're hearing horrible things like a 6-year-old in Chicago getting murdered, people having guns drawn and pointed at them or discharged.
These are some of the stories coming into the Council of American Islamic Relations. The organization says it has received reports of more than 1,000 incidents against Muslims in the U.S. since the start of the Israel-Hamas war.
But now it's students being doxxed en masse, right? So personal information given out, digital trucks with their names and faces on it.
The Muslim advocacy group is now calling on President Biden to take action.
The immediate rapid response crisis measure is call for a ceasefire in Gaza.
The Council on American Islamic Relations says it has also seen an increase, citing 774 complaints since October 25th.
Very much. The Council on American Islamic Relations says more than 750 incidents of anti-Arab or anti-Muslim bias have been reported across the country since October 7th. And joining us now to talk about this, Zainab Chaudhry is the spokesperson and Maryland director for the organization known as CAIR. And I know that some of our viewers are right now watching this interview and saying, well, what about Hamas? What is their responsibility in all of this? Do you blame, does some of the blame fall on Hamas?
Look, we have 2.2 million people who live in Gaza, about half of which are civilians, are children, more than half of which are civilians. The vast majority of the 2.2 million population are civilians, about half of which are children. To justify the kind of impunity, the kind of aggression that the Israeli military is waging in Gaza, the kind of airstrikes that are demolishing hospitals and houses of worship and refugee camps. It's unconscionable, right? And it's like, if you were to take out a school shooter, you wouldn't shoot up the entire school. You wouldn't bomb the entire school and kill every student within the school if you were trying to take out a mass shooter. The fact that this is continuously being used as an excuse to justify horrendous war crimes and acts of atrocity that are occurring against Palestinians is unconscionable. And that's also, unfortunately, fueling the hate bias within our own communities.
All right, Zainab Chaudhry, thank you very much for coming in. We appreciate it.
What is your assessment of what we're seeing on college campuses currently when it comes to Jewish students?
We've seen escalating tensions targeting both Jewish students as well as Palestinian Solidarity students. All targeting of students is unacceptable, but we need to make a distinction between hate speech and political speech. What we've seen is that some Jewish students have been wrongfully targeted, and we condemn that. We've also seen that Muslim and pro-Palestinian students have been horribly targeted. At college campuses across the state of California, the deans of various UC campuses have issued pro-Israel statements, have isolated Palestinian students. We've seen Palestinian students be doxxed, their faces put on the sides of trucks, driven around campuses and in their neighborhoods, and the universities have not stepped in. And of course, very horribly, a professor at UC Berkeley wrote an op-ed urging employers not to hire his students, calling them anti-Semitic when in fact what they are is pro-Palestinian.
Right, but let's get into that for just a second. We understand the dynamic that has taken place over the course of this conflict. There are Palestinian civilians who've died, thousands of them. We understand.
Close to 10,000. Close to 10,000. A hospital was bombed overnight.
We understand that. But for those people on the outside looking into this, they look at the comments that were made on October 7th, immediately. This is before any kind of retaliatory strike by Israel that celebrated the Hamas attack, where you slaughtered young people at a music festival, where you condoned the rape of Jewish women.
Who did that?
Who did that?
I was happy to see people breaking the siege and throwing down the shackles of their own land and walk free into their lands that they were not allowed to walk.
I'm just saying that when you had Erwin Chemerinsky was on just before you, and he said there were demonstrations in support on the day of the attack of Hamas.
There were demonstrations in support of Palestinian freedom. The violence did not begin on October 7th. The Israeli assault on Gaza and Palestinians has been ongoing for decades. I can assure you, I have not seen a single statement celebrating violence against innocent people. What I have seen is hope for freedom for Palestinians. It's also not accurate to say that the retaliation didn't begin the same day. Israeli violence against Palestinians predates October 7th and has now been incredibly disproportionate and without any discernment.
I think people watching this will say, listen, we understand the longstanding problems in that region. The fact of the matter is that for them to celebrate on the day of the assault on Israeli citizens,
Who celebrated? But who celebrated the loss of innocent lives? Like, that's not an accurate statement.
I was happy to see people breaking the siege.
If anything was celebrated, it was that people broke through a 15-year siege that had been suffocating them.
Right.
There's no celebration of the loss of innocent life. That's not an accurate statement.
Well,
Show me the quote.
I'm just telling you what the dean of the University of California School of Law,
right. The dean who has had numerous complaints. The complaints we are receiving from his campus are that those students don't feel safe, that his statements are repeatedly one-sided. His students are being doxxed and are being threatened by pro-Israeli organizations, and he has not stepped up to protect them. So he can say what he wants, but until he can show me a screenshot of somebody celebrating the death of an innocent life, this conversation is not going anywhere. Anti-Semitism is to be condemned. So too is the Israeli occupation.
We'll leave it there. Zahra Bilu is the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Meanwhile, a new study finds that Muslim students are bullied at twice the rate of other students. The Office of the Council on American Islamic Relations in San Francisco says half of their respondents in a survey reported feeling unsafe, unwelcome, or uncomfortable at school because of their Muslim identity. 34% also said the bullying had a negative impact on their physical, mental, or emotional well-being. Council offices in Los Angeles, Sacramento, and San Diego have received multiple reports of hate-based violence and discrimination since the war between Israel and Hamas started.
So new at 4, the Council on American Islamic Relations has filed an Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint against Montgomery County Public Schools. They claim a Muslim teacher was put on administrative leave because of her email signature that supports Palestine.
Council on American Islamic Relations will announce a discrimination complaint against Montgomery County Public Schools. CAIR says it filed a complaint with the EEOC. The group says the school system reprimanded a Muslim Arab middle school teacher because her email signature expressed support for Palestinians. We've reached out to the school system for a comment.
CAIR says Hajur Hagan, a Muslim teacher at Argyle Middle School, was placed on administrative leave over this. Her email signature that says, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free."
We're shocked to hear about the county's approach.
During a news conference this morning to announce the complaint, CAIR says O'Hagan's colleagues all had similar speech in their email signatures, and she was the only teacher reprimanded.
New here at 5 o'clock, a Muslim woman claims a job offer at a Chicago law firm was rescinded over her public support for Palestinians. And her complaint is being supported by members of the Chicago Council on American Islamic Relations. Mayor Kawash taking a closer look now at why she claims she lost that job before starting it.
Yeah, the woman tells us this feels like a discrimination case to her because of her faith and religion. She says it was shocking to be let go from Foley and Laudner here in River North just a day before she was supposed to start her job. An Arab American woman is now taking legal action against the Foley and Lardner law firm in Chicago for allegedly discriminating against her when they rescinded her job offer. Janan Shahadi is a Georgetown law graduate who had been interning with that law firm when she says they offered her a full-time position about a year ago, and she was set to start that job in late October. But right before her first day on the job, she says she was called into a meeting with the head partners.
They interrogated me in a hostile manner about my social media posts related to Palestine, about my involvement with Students for Justice in Palestine, and about other aspects of my identity and background.
Shahadi says the law firm also pulled up a video of her public comment at a city council meeting on October 13th, where she asked aldermen to vote against an Israeli resolution to condemn Hamas's attack on Gaza. This is video of her in a news conference following that meeting.
I spoke in the public comments, as is my First Amendment right. I made a 3-minute speech saying that the resolution was entirely one-sided, made no mention of Palestinians. My post advocated again for Palestinian rights and to the occupation and upholding international law.
Shahadi says it's emotionally painful for her and has caused some financial struggles too, as she rented an apartment next to that law firm, which she can no longer afford. She believes the treatment to her is not the same as others at that law firm.
They framed my advocacy for Palestinian rights as supporting terrorism, which is a racist smear with no factual basis, when support for Palestinian rights is about freedom and equality.
The Chicago chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations is now helping her pursue legal action against the law firm.
We're very clear in what we stand for. We stand for the human and civil rights of everyday human beings. Men, women, and children.
We reached out to Foley and Lardner multiple times today for comment, but have not heard back. Janan's lawyers tell us they will be filing discrimination and equal opportunity claims before officially filing a lawsuit. From River North, Mayor Kawash, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
All right. We've seen a drastic increase in anti-Muslim bigotry.
Edward Ahmed Mitchell is the National Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations.
We're hearing from students, protesters, employees, doctors who are being harassed, threatened, doxxed, even physically
attacked.
Mitchell says incidents of anti-Muslim hate have spiked across the nation in the wake of the war between Israel and Hamas.
Our organization received 774 complaints in the 20 days after October 7th. That marks a 245% increase over the same period of time last year. Must counter hate in this country, whether it's anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or anti-Palestinian racism. All of it is unacceptable.
Anti-Semitism is increasing, and that part is true. We'll have some numbers here for you, but so is Islamophobia.
On college campuses nationwide, Jewish and Muslim students worry the war overseas is fueling hate here at home.
I do not feel safe.
And is that true of all hate speech, Muslims, Jews as targets?
It's true of anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred.
As the FBI has noted, we are seeing an increase in reported threats against faith communities, particularly Jewish, Muslim, and Arab communities and institutions.
We've seen a horrific rise of Islamophobia.
Muslim and those perceived to be Muslim have endured a disproportionate number of hate-fueled attacks. And certainly President Biden understands that many of our Muslim, Arab Americans and Palestinian American loved ones and neighbors are worried about the hate being directed at their communities.
Okay, so now you have a task force. Right, you have a task force for Islamophobia. So let's go through the claims, because the truth matters. Here's the claim that they're making. Okay, that both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are way up. All right, here's the truth statistically. Anti-Semitism has increased significantly, and a huge portion of that, comes from the Islamic world, and it's increased far more than Islamophobia. So from October 7th, 2023 to today versus the same period last year as a comparison. Then the claim is that anti-Islamic hate crimes have increased 216%. Okay, so those are from the ADL and CAIR. But here we have the FBI director, Chris Wray, saying that hate crimes are disproportionately anti-Semitic, and then we'll give you some of those numbers.
What proportion of these hate crimes has been directed towards Muslims, for instance? If 60% were towards Jews, what percent towards Muslims?
I don't have that percentage, but it's obviously quite a bit smaller than 60% by definition. But I think that the point that I was trying to make there, which I really think Americans need to understand, is how wildly disproportionate, if you could ever use a word like proportionate in something like this, that is. 2.4% of the American public, 60% of religious-based hate crimes. This is a group that has the outrageous distinction of being uniquely targeted, and they need our help.
So you have the CAIR numbers, and you have the ADL numbers sort of more internationally, but these are now the numbers from the FBI.
FBI 2022 stats is what he's quoting, because that's the most recent stats that he has. It's closer to like 55%. They're probably rounding up a little bit. And on the anti-Islamic hate crimes, 7.7%. Yeah. So I think the focus here should probably be on the anti-Semitic 60% of hate crimes for 2.6% of the population.
Right.
That seems disproportional to me.
Well, I think not only is it disproportional, but what matters is who's committing the crime. So in other words, if 55% of the recipients of being walloped, right, hate crimes are Jews, well, how many hate crimes are they perpetrating? I would imagine not as many as the Islamists, who make up 7.7% of the victims.
They tend not to.
I would imagine that a lot of the anti-Semitic hate crimes are being committed by Islamists. There are far more Muslims, just so you know, in the United States than there are white supremacists. It's not even close. So let's kind of look at this, how this is translated into the real world. These are you now have the empirical. Let's go to the anecdotal. October 21st, the Detroit synagogue leader, Samantha Wohl, she was murdered at her home.
Yeah, terrible story.
And the Detroit police said that this was not a hate crime, citing an untouched Israeli flag at her house.
Yeah, literally this woman was found dead on the sidewalk. They followed a blood trail. She had been stabbed several times early in the morning after coming home from a wedding. And the police go in the house, and I kid you not, the only reference to this not being a hate crime, and look, you can't just assume because this was a Jewish leader that it was a hate crime.
Right.
But that's probably where you start, right? Especially
certainly when you're skipping a hop away from Dearborn.
Yeah, exactly, right? With tensions as high as they are. And they're like, oh, hey guys, that flag right over there, it's perfect. It's left untouched. That can't be a hate crime.
We can give you another example. November 6th, there was an elderly Jewish man, and we're going to show you, just so you know, a clip, but we're not showing you a clip of the man dying or the attack. He was killed in L.A. after an altercation with an anti-Israel protester.
What are you gonna do? What you gonna do? What you gonna do? You can just fucking vote. You just fucking vote. Just go. I'm right here. I'm right here. You can only fight women and children. You can only fight women and children. Get that thing down. You can only fight women and children. That's it. You guys are cowards.
Now, the original NBC News headline read, "Man dies after hitting head during Israel and Palestinian rallies in California."
Jesus. And this pissed people off all across.
Well, then the death was ruled a homicide by the Ventura County Sheriff.
But that's the thing about this is, like, you know, we talk about this all the time. What did we know and when did we know it?
Right.
They knew from the very moment, because all of the reports coming across on X, and this is where it first kind of broke, like all of those reports were that a protester clashed with this guy and attacked him, and he fell and hit his head as a result of the attack.
Yeah.
That is not a man falling and hitting his head. That is a man being attacked and dying from the attack.
According to the New York Times, one of the people seeking to downplay this incident was Hussein Alouche, the executive director of the Greater Los Angeles area chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations.
It's the Muslims attacking the Jews.